Hi, Smart News. A couple key stories to put on your radar today as you drift into the middle of the week. A lot of these stories have to do with politics in Washington, D.C. And you may notice that's not really the focus of Smarter News. I don't often lead with politics as are some of our key stories. And that's for a couple different reasons that just come down to editorial judgment. Number one, covering the play by play of political parties in Washington, D.C. takes a lot of time and resources with very little payoff. You can get really caught in the clutter of the back and forth and lose sight of the bigger picture. And I don't want to do that. So I tend to let the stories marinate a little bit before we jump in and talk a little bit more about them. And number two, fundamentally, I just have a philosophical problem with focusing too much on the political class over what actually impacts the people. And that's something I think that a lot of media organizations are guilty of. So when I'm looking at what to actually pull for you to talk to you about, especially in video when we just have a couple minutes, I'm thinking about the stories that have the most immediate impact on your life. And so that's how I'm sort of sorting through the clutter myself to try to figure out, okay, what do we really need to talk about and why it matters? We do have a couple political stories that do have some significance today. Number one, Congress decided to raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt limit for the US government. And here's what to know about that. It's not exactly the same as a line of credit, but you can think about it that way. We have financial obligations that we are borrowing in different ways to pay to fill those obligations. If we do not raise the debt limit, then we default. If we default as the most powerful economy in the world, that could have global repercussions because we're thought to be a reliable source of financial stability. And if that's suddenly not the case, that could really cause a lot of ripple effects. So Congress, despite a lot of political back and forth, decided to raise the debt limit. And this will go to the president, who will most likely, for sure, sign this and put it into effect. And so this does push off a question and ongoing conversation that comes up all the time about spending by both parties and whether or not we're spending appropriately and in the right ways to serve the American people. So that's something that you should know. A second big story that happened on Capitol Hill that you should know about is that Congress voted to hold Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff to President Trump, in contempt of Congress. So here's the backstory to this. There is an ongoing investigation by a House committee into what happened on January 6th, the riot at the Capitol. Mark Meadows was participating in this investigation, turned over thousands of emails and text messages, and then decided not to participate. It was a little bit of a hokey pokey. The investigative committee wanted more. He did not want to give more in the way that they wanted. And so they voted to hold him into contempt. And then the broader House decided to do so. The reason why this matters is that this isn't just anybody. This is the former chief of staff for President Trump at the time that this riot took place. And now that the House took this action, it actually refers this contempt charge to the Justice Department. And the Justice Department can decide whether or not to try to prosecute Mark Meadows. So big picture, there's a lot of disagreement about the investigation into January 6th. You have Democrats and some Republicans saying this investigation is absolutely necessary. We need to understand what happened that day and whether or not the action or inaction by the White House added to the riot that happened on Capitol Hill. You have Republicans and critics of the investigation saying this is nothing more than a witch hunt to go after anybody that supported President Trump. And so you have these two sides still not finding any common ground at this current time. Big picture, just remember, it's time of Congress. It's the time of Congress, and time is money, is your money and resources that are being pushed towards this investigation. What will the end result be? What will the end result be for Mark Meadows? What will the end result be for the investigation? We do not know at this time, but important just to be aware of this critical step. Okay, finally, just want to mention something going on with the pandemic. There's new information coming from Europe that seems to suggest that this Omicron variant is much more transmissible than previous variants. It seems to be spreading at a much more rapid pace than health officials thought. Now, we're still getting information that is suggesting that the illness from the variant is not as severe as prior illness. But remember, sometimes understanding severity is delayed several weeks. Big picture is health officials are worried as you see more cases that actually just the sheer number of cases could lead to more severe illness. So they're concerned about this. You have a booster campaign in place. In fact, Sarah from London sent us this picture of people lined up around the block waiting for their booster because of concern in the UK. Why do we pay close attention to this? Well, we're getting some new information about this variant, but also remember what happened in Europe tended to foreshadow what we saw here in the United States. And so I want to keep an eye on what health officials are learning there. All right, final story that has nothing to do with the pandemic and politics, but it's just too good not to mention. Apparently, it's a big anniversary this week, a 100-year anniversary for the Bloody Mary, for the cocktail. You want to know where it actually apparently was invented? In Europe, in France, in Paris, at a bar called Harry's Bar. I would think it would be like Francois, but no, it's Harry's Bar in Paris. Apparently, a book published the recipe for the Bloody Mary in 1921. The bartender for that bar published a book with the recipe. So 100 years of a Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary's not my thing. Is it your thing? It's just not, tomato juice isn't my thing. A mimosa? I can get behind. I can get behind that. Vitamin C champagne, I can get behind that. But that was sort of a fun fact today. All right, a couple big stories to watch, more including some actions from the Supreme Court on our website. So always check that out. Questions and comments, let me know, and more on smarternews.com. Have a great day.